Welcome at the garden room here at wonderful KWI and also out there in the virtual world. My name is Stefan Höhne. I'm a senior researcher here at KWI, and it's a deep pleasure for me to welcome you to tonight's talk by Alina Wandelt, entitled From Libraries to Data Centers, an Architectural, in brackets, History of Information Storage. After the presentation, we would love to open the space for discussion, and that includes the people on Zoom, and you're very much invited to write your questions in the chat, and Emily, who wonderfully will manage the Zoom tonight, will read them out loud for you. Briefly want to introduce Alina, our speaker tonight. She's a cultural sociologist specializing in qualitative research and methods, as well as historical sociology. We're very happy that Alina recently joined the Cryocultures research team here at KWI, a large international research project that looks into the politics, the futures, infrastructures of artificial cooling. And in this project, Alina's research focuses on ethnographies of the artificial cold, particularly in the domains of food and space cooling. She just returned from exploratory fieldwork in New Orleans, where she looks at the material manifestations of cooling practices, as well as the modes through which they are maintained, but also contested. Before joining Cryocultures, Alina held positions at Goethe University Frankfurt, particularly at the chair of interpretative methods and the chair for sociological theory. She earned her PhD in cultural sociology from the University of Leipzig with a dissertation that was the foundation of this book, Libraries in the Age of Digitalization, a Historical Sociology of Architecture. In German, the book came out very recently and is also available open access. And in the book, Alina traces the continuities, but also the discontinuities in the discourses, the materialities, and the practices that have shaped libraries since the mid-19th century. And not only as public institutions of knowledge, but also as material and architectural environments. So this work serves as a departure point for Alina's talk today, where she will not only explore the history of information centers, but she will also discuss how and if data centers can, in a way, be regarded as future successors of the library, or if they might actually mean the end of the library, as we know and so often deeply love them. That's the agenda for tonight. Welcome, Alina. We are looking forward to hear your thoughts.
So I really hope that this will not be the outcome that we're kind of predicting the end of libraries, but yeah, let's see. On Thursday, the 12th of March this year, the German Minister for Culture and Media, Wolfram Weimar, made a surprising announcement. The long-planned and unanimously approved architectural expansion of the German National Library in Leipzig, Germany's central repository library tasked with the collection of all printed and non-printed publications in Germany, was called off. The fifth expansion of the building, in the work for decades, 7 million euros already invested in the planning, all of a sudden cancelled. Wolfram Weimar argued that the collection of physical media would no longer be up to date, and that the collection should become digital only. This would, that was Weimar's line of reasoning, reduce bureaucracy and save administrative costs. A seemingly fantastic opportunity for savings given the government's strained budget situation. Weimar's hasty announcement was met with strong protests. On March 18th, only 6 days after the initial announcement that no funding was to be made available for realizing the extension, Weimar conceded that the construction project could be discussed as part of the ongoing budget negotiations. A final review is yet to be carried out, and long-term financing has not been secured to date. But why am I referring to this incident in the first place? From my perspective, the sudden cancellation of the long-planned architectural expansion is not only another proof of the minister's profound lack of expertise for his job, while it certainly also is. Nor is it, while it also is, an example of how conservative cultural policy has changed in recent years. For me personally, the controversy is also interesting for at least two other reasons. First, I think it is a very illustrative example for an apparently still quite widespread set of misunderstandings about how the vast amounts of information, or put more generally, data, in our digital lives are stored and managed today. This has been pointed out for many years now, but just as a reminder, there is no cloud. Both printed and digital data cannot be archived without space, and it cannot be stored for free. Digital data is not immaterial, nor is the cloud a cloud. To argue that digital data storage saves cost and is more up-to-date reveals a profound lack of understanding of the prerequisites, conditions, and effects of digital data storage and management. Especially when data is stored digitally over several decades, as in the case of the DNB, Germany's central archival library built for long-term preservation, functioning as the memory of the nation, the costs increase. Servers, I just want to show you the DNB, just for those who haven't visited it perhaps. Servers require not only significant space, but also constant upkeep and intensive cooling, consuming substantial amounts of energy. While the production of books and other media relies on natural resources, trees, and the storage of paper relies upon climate-controlled environments, digital only produces significant more and depends on also continuous high energy supply, often including gas and nuclear energy. In short, ubiquitous computing and seemingly infinite data storage comes at a high environmental cost. A second reason why I find the controversy around the German National Library so interesting is that it highlights how little of a discourse around the necessity and the actual contents of data centers is held. I've included a picture of a data center in Essen here, and I'm somewhat guessing that most of you have probably never seen or noticed it, even if you live here. It's in Altenessen, I think. Germany is currently home to the largest number of data centers in Europe, and while most data centers are located around Frankfurt and Berlin, Essen alone has around 4. Surges in electricity prices, water shortages, noise pollution, and other problems may not be as far off as we would like. Data centers, however, do not only fly under the radar architecturally, but are also very rarely discussed in terms of the actual content. And at the same time, and I think this is why it was interesting, the German Minister for Culture and Media has called into question whether the DNB should store 2 copies of every publication or just 1. Just to give you some context, most other national libraries store around 10 copies of every publication they held. So, I think this was a lengthy introduction, but what I set out to do today is comparing libraries and data centers. Or more precisely, I will explore certain aspects of their historical development. Initially, you may ask why this, for instance, the historic reading room of the DNB built in the early 20th century, what it has to do with data centers. Upon closer examination, however, libraries and data centers have a couple of things in common. At the very least, and this is why I've given the talk the title From Libraries to Data Centers, both libraries and data centers are specific spaces, materials, sites, and architectures of information storage and management, albeit at different times. Libraries were the main material site and architectures of information storage in the modern age, a term denoting an era dating back to at least the mid-19th century. Data centers have taken on this role, at least partially, since the mid-1990s, that is when the internet was commercialized. Both sides are architectural responses to a rapid increase in the amount of information. In the 19th century, printed matter, and in the 21st century, predominantly digital data. The perception of information overload, the perceived threat of an information explosion, is hence not a new phenomenon. I've included one of my one of the favorite pictures I have around libraries. This is the painter by the painter Karl Spitzweg here, who's making fun of the librarian who's totally lost in books. One book is between his legs. He's trying to juggle 3 books at the same time. He's already having trouble keeping track and making sense of the overwhelming number of books on the shelves. And to some extent, data centers now deal with surprisingly similar problems: safety, fire protection, and climate control of media or data, whether in trying to safeguard books from being stolen or servers from being hacked, or both from burning or more recently overheating. I've included a photo of the Anna Amalia Library in Weimar that burned in the year 2004, and also a photo of a data center burning in Strasbourg. And this is also what they share, this common concern of a fire breaking out. Both analog and digital information storage, and I think the photos are nice reminders of that, are never fully secure and require a lot of maintenance. In practice, the boundary between analog and digital information storage is further blurred because large libraries such as the DNB, of course, also rely on server infrastructure on site. And I think what is interesting here that only very little libraries have their own data centers but rely on commercial colocation data centers in which they rent space. More important than simply listing all these similarities between libraries and data centers, and this is my proposition today, is that I believe that there are lessons to be learned for the politics of data centers from the dynamic history of library. In order to get to this point, and Stefan already mentioned that, I will mainly get into the history of libraries, and I'm relying on my book that was published last year. However, I decided to kind of get into the specifics of general information storage first, historically. Because in one way or another, societies were always concerned with the storage and preservation of information, be it in the form of orally transmitted stories about gods or specific plants you should or should not eat, techniques to harvest fruit and vegetables, etc. In oral society, Foster Stockwell posits, the persons with the best memories therefore often occupied the position of leaders. Histories of information storage and management therefore tend to date back to humanity itself, or at the very least begin with the Greek or Roman Empire, such as in the classical study of Francis Yates, published in 1974, who traces how the ancient Greeks, to whom a trained memory was of vital importance, created an elaborate memory system with the body functioning as the repository of knowledge. So to say, the material side of information. Many historical accounts of libraries, when defined as collections of media and the physical locations holding those collections, usually also tend to begin quite early. A prominent case in this regard is the Library of Alexandria, probably the most emblematic library of classical antiquity. Interestingly, it is contested how large the Library of Alexandria actually was, whether or not it belonged to a larger learning center, and also whether it was the earliest library of its kind in the first place. Nevertheless, it is widely regarded as a great achievement in the history of information, as it, for the very least symbolically, has come to represent a giant endeavor to amass all known literature and scholarly texts in one central location to preserve it. In my dissertation, and today I don't want to go back that far, and I want to explain why. While collections of information have been prevalent in societies for a very long time, most information collections before the industrial age did not constitute separate independent library buildings. Instead, they were attached to temple complexes, housed in a single room or a shelf integrated into other buildings. So while early libraries were located in permanent structures, Egyptian stone buildings or Mesopotamian brick buildings, as this one in Ephesus here on the picture, they served as undifferentiated document collections that simultaneously and indiscriminately combined the functions of archives, libraries, cult collections, and early information centers. Both the book collections of the European Middle Ages and the libraries of the modern era were usually housed in a single room. Although the growth in holdings during the Renaissance in the 15th century necessitated larger premises, separate library buildings remained the absolute exception for a very long time. Large libraries were simply not a requirement that could be deduced from the size of the holdings of the era. And it was not until the 19th century that the library emerged as a distinct building project that also affected the newly urbanized cities in modern Western Europe. And of course, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the 19th century that provided the grounds for this development, but obviously one major thing is the history of publication. Although the invention of printing had already revolutionized the book industry at the beginning of the 15th century, radical changes in publishing did not occur until the machine age after 1800. Both the number of printing houses and the quantity of printed books eventually multiplied. This is just a figure showing how much of an increase of the publication that meant. The reduced production costs of books also contributed to a new understanding of books, which now appeared more as mass-produced goods for whose compact storage and rapid availability rational storage techniques and business procedures had to be provided. So libraries, as collections of information, have a relatively long cultural history, but it was not until the industrial age that they emerged as separate buildings and institutions independent from religious or other purposes. It was only that critical amount of information, predominantly in the form of printed books and newly founded magazines, that caused the massive building boom of libraries. And rising literacy expanded demand for reading material. In the course of this, libraries transformed from cultural monuments into functional institutions whose architectural character was to be derived from the fact that they collected, stored, and managed information as efficiently as possible. Libraries were built for both continuous expansion and efficiency. And I want to illustrate this development with a few pictures. Let's have a look at this library still in place today, located in St. Gallen, Switzerland, constructed in the mid-18th century. The rooms designed as a somehow sort of Gesamtkunstwerk, relatively little space is devoted to the books that are arranged along the walls. Baroque libraries in the 17th and 18th century, this is how a librarian puts it at the beginning of the 20th century, could still afford the luxury of treating the spines of their books as decorative elements. And while the old reading rooms of the 17th and 18th century libraries refrained from expansion solely on account of its artistic refinement, the functional utilitarian building of the 19th and 20th centuries is fundamentally designed for expansion. Let's make a bold jump to the mid-19th century to Paris, where these principles took shape for the very first time. The library in Paris Saint-Geneviève, opened in 1854, is the first library in which various library functions are separated. The lower floor here in this picture is entirely used for books and magazines, reflecting the huge surge in publications and also in terms of the general size of the library. This library also occupies a special position in the history of libraries because it includes a reading room in the library, which we may take for granted now, but which is actually quite a recent development. Technologies such as electric lighting and indoor heating made it possible to use libraries for longer periods of time and also contributed to opening libraries to a wider readership. But this only came later. In 1859, the reading room was depicted as is shown here, and it is no coincidence that you see no women here, by the way. In short, the history of libraries as we know them today is by no means a continuous history. Some key features as we know them today, things that we take for granted, did not evolve thousands of years ago, but just 200 years ago, including that libraries are nowadays often publicly funded and open to the public. And most of these developments really took off in the 20th century, but this is somewhat the earliest example of it. Only then libraries also became increasingly places that one could actually spend time in, rather than just get books and get out. Between 1900 and 1911, that is within only 10 years, the number of libraries in German cities doubled. The massive increase in printed materials in the wake of industrialization as well as the notion of a supposedly ever-growing number of publications that libraries would have to collect and preserve in the future, remained the dominant rationale for building new libraries at the beginning of the 20th century. The current building of the DNB in Leipzig, shown on this picture here, was also constructed around that time. And I think its architectural history offers valuable insights into some of the development in the information storage history of the 20th century. And I mean, so far we have only discussed it as a kind of discursive element of contentious cultural politics. The building and its transformation are equally interesting, as they follow social irregularities that both reflect and shape social processes. So in 1913, when der Börsenverein der deutschen Buchhändler zu Leipzig, the German Book Traders Association, the city of Leipzig and the Kingdom of Saxony signed a contract for the foundation of the Deutsche Bücherei, as it was called back then, tasking the library to collect, catalog, and make available for use all German publication. A new building was to realize this undertaking. It was constructed during the war years from 1914 to 1916 and reflects the surge of publications during that time. And while it may not look like it from our perspective today, the motif of the library as a functional warehouse is also at present here. One of the architects of the original buildings, Carl Julius Baer, in 1925 stated that one important and difficult design requirement was that it had to be possible to add further annexes conveniently without affecting the entire organism and the external appearance of the library. For it is currently presumed that the building ensemble in its entirety will not be complete for another 200 years. So, and this is how the DNB looks today, a sort of, I don't know, mix or palimpsest of different architectural styles that were added in the 21st century and the 20th century, all in one building. A first annex was finished on the east side in 1936. So this is the plan of when which annex was added. This annex was already foreseen in the original construction plan, and up close, the new reading room looks a bit different, a little bit less ornamental, a little bit more straightforward in the style of Neue Sachlichkeit. More than anything, however, it included more stacks for books. The second annex, you can this on the left side of the original building, finished in 1963, is also keeping in with the original plans on the exterior. So again, while stylistically in line with contemporary design principles, so this is the reading room added during that time, straight lines, sharp angles, and large-scale decor in the new reading room, the annex does not constitute a major paradigm shift. More interesting is again what is not depicted here: a technology reading room and new underground storage area for 1 million volumes of media. The third annex looks different. Finished in 1982, it marks a transition in the architectural history of the DNB, but is actually only the culmination of a trend that started in the mid-19th century, that is, the library's evolution into a super-efficient repository. 3 book towers, significantly exceeding the height of the original building, as you can see, especially here on the right picture, in order to cope with the seemingly ever-increasing, continuous, explosive growth in publications, and now other media too. Coming from an industrial context, the high-density vertical storage towers are built as efficient storage space. And the new stacks also reflect that, moving storage on rails, marking a period of highly efficient storage in libraries. In the newest, this is also, this is the 4th annex. In the newest annex, media such as periodicals and sound recordings are stored in electrically powered mobile shelving systems, storing media in optimum conditions, protected from daylight, at a temperature of 18 degrees Celsius and a relative air humidity of 50% or 30% in the sound recording stacks, in order to prevent their deterioration. On the inside, one could say, the race for efficient storage has not experienced any disruption. On the outside, the fourth extension, finished in 2011, looks very different. So what happened to the library as the warehouse, the efficient storage, the rectangular building always ready to be extended at every time? The short answer to that is, of course, digitalization. With the adoption of the internet as a commercial infrastructure in the mid-1990s, the dawn of the digital age, libraries came under pressure to justify their existence. For the very first time, search engines such as Yahoo made it possible to access information conveniently from home via a personal computer. As a result, libraries were frequently declared obsolete. After all, who still needs libraries when supposedly any information can be accessed at any time and in any place? With the internet, home computers, and later mobile phones, information could be conveniently accessed without ever setting foot in a library. Libraries were therefore heavily called into question. Or, as one of the headlines here on the slide asks, libraries in the digital age, evolution or extinction. The internet shook the very foundation of libraries' long-established self-image and their function as physical sites of information storage and management. Some libraries, particularly smaller branch libraries, had to close in the course of this. And the total number of libraries continues to decrease, as these numbers show for the years 2010 to 2024. Most libraries, however, have found new strategies to justify their existence. And a lot of newly built libraries, especially those planned after 2000, at least when the financial possibilities allowed, today rather look like this than like a warehouse. New designs reinventing the physical spaces have been an integral part of this transformation, in effect allowing for a wider range of using libraries today. And I think, interestingly, this also pertains to the DNB, which officially the mandate hasn't changed. It's still tasked with collecting, storing the information, being the memory of the nation, and so on, but it also looks different architecturally. Libraries, and I think the DNB also shows this, have long evolved beyond their traditional role as repositories of books. Their architecture played a crucial role for that. At the same time, they've become ever-changing social institutions. And they've always been social institutions, but much more nowadays. Be it as a public meeting space without the obligation to spend money, an educational facility for families, a co-working room for students, a safe space for children during their homework, increasingly also a safe space for minorities, queer people, organizations that have lost their funding or venues elsewhere, and last but not least, homeless people. Libraries do not only offer access to sanitary infrastructure and water, but also serve as warming shelters in winter and cooling retreats in summer. And I think it is also interesting that this trend is not limited to public libraries. It is increasingly also evident in specialized research and national libraries such as the DNB or the Stabi in Berlin. According to Shannon Matern, a US media theorist that has worked extensively on libraries, the library's broad mandate means that it often picks up the slack when other institutions fall short. And I think it's open to debate in how far the library's responsibilities should and can further be stretched. In my book, I examine all of this in greater detail. For the purpose of this discussion, I think it suffices to say that the new possibilities offered by digital information storage and processing have freed up physical space within libraries, and that this space is now used mainly for people rather than books or other media. But at the same time, when libraries were called into question, a new type of building started to change the fabric of the city: data centers. Arising from the requirements of digital data processing and storage, data centers arose as separate buildings during the dot-com bubble from 1997 to 2000. Previously integrated into existing premises as server and technical rooms, It was around that time when many internet companies began constructing their own data storage and processing buildings. And this line graph is not a scientific number, but actually provided by a private data center company, and I think it's also most probably not accurate, but so is a lot of research on data centers, and that is also part of the problem of research on data centers. And also please bear in mind that it stops in before COVID hit and before generative AI became a thing. So, yet the general trajectory of the building boom of data centers is still visible. The sharp rise after the 1990s and an ongoing building boom that is somewhat similar to the building boom of libraries in the late 19th and early 20th century. And of course, and I think this is also something that they have in common, the history of data centers dates back much earlier. Most histories of data centers usually begin no later than the 1950s, when the first mainframe computers, that is, large computers used primarily to do complex math used by organizations, were commercialized. But while I love photos like these, advertisement photos of IBM, taken in the late 1950s, mainframe computers back then did not require whole buildings, nor did they instantly change the fabric of cities in the ways that data centers nowadays do. And what I mean by that is something that I've very recently learned, for instance, that has been referred to as energy gentrification in cities. Energy gentrification in cities refers to processes when large big tech companies reserve huge capacities of the local grid so that other businesses are forced to locate elsewhere. Architecturally, data centers are somewhat reminiscent of closed-stack libraries, in that they are not built for people. Depending on the size, data centers may need 20 to 50 staff members for maintenance, but it's not an office for software developers, product managers, or marketing experts. It is a warehouse of and for service. As Katharina Neubauer pointed out, an architect who a couple of years ago set out to visit all data centers around the world, a characteristic feature of these architectures is that they are generally unremarkable. Faceless buildings with little design appeal. Often not explicitly hidden, but largely situated outside the public eye. And the photo here features a data center photographed by Neubauer in Amsterdam in 2019. Today, Neubauer's undertaking would be much more difficult. The number of data centers has increased dramatically as they have grown in size. This photo here shows a newer and much larger so-called hyperscale data center, and it's perhaps also what data centers are generally perceived like in the public at the moment. It is situated in Oregon in the US and is a huge data center that has had massive effects on the whole region, including surges in electricity prices, water shortages, and noise pollution. My colleagues in Paderborn, the computing team at CalCryo, can tell you so much more about data centers, but for my purpose here, I think it suffices to say that environmentally friendly data centers just do not exist to date. Data centers are affecting cities, and people have started to protest the building of data centers in their neighborhoods. In the US and Mexico, the UK and Ireland, but also in Spain and in the Netherlands. And what I found interesting is that when critically approaching the search of data centers worldwide, scholars often tend to take an elemental approach, that is, a critique focusing on the basic materials and resources involved in data centers, so to say, the material footprint and resource extraction of data centers. The rare earth materials in the hardware, the water used for cooling, human labor behind data processing, the energy that powers the systems, and the heat generated by computation. In contrast, the data itself plays a relatively marginal role in these studies. Defining a data center, as the authors of an article on the making of critical data centers affirm, claim, I quote, "In the 20th century does not have much to do with the data or the people working on with it, but predominantly with the material structure in which the data is held. The data itself is, incidentally, a given almost taken for granted. And it will, as they continue, even become less relevant since they foresee that the modalities of data centers will change. To me, this is very curious. While studies focusing on the extensive resource extraction of data centers are, of course, highly needed, I would argue that we need at least a second perspective on data centers. One that could not only correct the myth of data centers as unprecedented, seemingly new historical phenomena, but also brings into focus what remains at their core, namely information. What, in fact, is stored in these infrastructures, and do we truly need all of it? Or, put differently, is it justifiable to extract the remaining lithium and deplete scarce water resources so that a company like Amazon can retain knowledge of what we purchased in 2013 and which trail of browser history led us there? Studies indicate, my colleague Mina from the computing team pointed me to that as much as 70% of enterprise data may be classified as ROT. That is, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data within digital infrastructures. Put differently, data waste. I think that the history of libraries has something to offer here. All these questions, what to collect, what to preserve, and crucially, what to discard, have long been central to the practice of libraries. Makulieren, the systematic removal of materials from collections, has been a central practice in libraries and points to an enduring awareness that information storage must also include forgetting. Data centers, by contrast, tend toward accumulation without curation. Their logic is one of retention maximization driven less by collective value than by potential future monetization. In this sense, they inherit the archival impulse of libraries, but without the corresponding ethics of limitation. At this point, one might object that libraries and data centers are not comparable because the latter are predominantly owned and operated by private corporations, mostly big tech giants. And of course, this is true. But libraries too were not originally public institutions. For much of the history, they were private collections assembled for the benefit of individuals, civil servants, scholarly elites, etc. It was only through the initiative of particular individuals who chose to open their collections and through broader social transformations, the democratization of education and rising literacy rates in the 19th century and 20th century, that libraries gradually became public. In the German context, for instance, the first public library was founded only in 1828, that is, thousands of years after the emergence of libraries as such. And it was not until after World War II that the debate in libraries came to focus primarily on ensuring access for as many people as possible. Remembering this history allows us to shift the question. Rather than taking the cloud as a naturally private technical domain in the hands of a few, we might ask, why do we not begin by regarding it as public, or at least as something that ought to be shaped by public interest? As the architectural critic Niklas Mark has put it, server farms are to the digital world what castles used to be, the seat of power. But if data is the greatest collective treasure of society in the digital age, the basic material for economy and politics, why are the places where it is stored so invisible? To this argument, I would like to add, if data centers are the most important sites for the storage of information of our times, why are we not more urgently debating what kinds of data they contain? The history of libraries reminds us that storage has never been a purely technical matter. It has always been shaped by social processes and political struggles. Libraries in the 19th and 20th century did not simply expand. They were transformed through acts of opening, through changing notions of access, and through evolving criteria of inclusion and exclusion. And I think if we take this seriously, then the politics of data centers cannot be limited to questions of energy consumption alone. It must also include decisions about selection and deletion, about access, and ultimately about the collective priorities that these infrastructures silently encode. In this sense, what I want to propose here is not that data centers are or should become libraries, but that they, like libraries before them, are contingent sites, ones that can be contested, opened, and reimagined.